I am Sierra Vance, 24 years old, and I am currently the only member of the Vance bloodline living in a cold, windowless storage unit. At my sister's grand promotion party in the Newport Grand Ballroom, she stood on the high stage holding a glass of expensive champagne. She looked down and mocked me in front of hundreds of guests. "Look at my poor little sister. You should be grateful that I even allowed a homeless failure like you to show up tonight." The crowd began to erupt in laughter. The clinking of wine glasses echoed through the luxurious room like knives piercing the air. She had sent me a reconciliation email, promising to return my father's Patek Philippe watch. The only keepsake I truly craved, just to lure me here, and turn me into a laughingstock for her promotion. She held the watch up high, calling it a charity gift for a loser clinging to the past. But what she and everyone mocking me didn't realize was that with just one glance, I knew the watch in her hand was a fake. I didn't argue. I simply offered a faint smile and quietly walked away amidst their contemptuous stares. What none of them knew was, by tomorrow morning, everything would be flipped upside down. Humiliation is sometimes a poison, but for me, it is the most ruthless motivation to topple a corrupt empire. If you want to see how I reclaimed what was rightfully mine, hit that subscribe button and leave a justice comment to join me in this ultimate reversal. The heavy iron shutter of Unit 402 slammed shut with a bone-chilling metallic echoed, sealing me away from the salt-scented air of Newport and dragging me back into a world of dust and silence. This wasn't some random rental space I found on Craigslist. It was an abandoned archive facility belonging to Vance Group, a place my sister Bianca Vance had deemed a graveyard of useless paper years ago. To her, these rows of towering steel shelves were just expenses on a balance sheet, but to me, they were the only roof I had left. I navigated the narrow aisles by the dim glow of a battery-powered lantern, my shadow dancing against stacks of legal folders and humming backup servers from the late 90s that still breathed with a faint electric warmth. Living here was a constant game of shadows. I had arranged my life into 10 by 10 feet of concrete reality, a thin air mattress tucked behind a fortress of mahogany filing cabinets, and a small camping stove hidden inside a crate marked Tax Records, 1994. I survived on lukewarm canned soup and the bitter grit of knowing that 10 miles away, my mother and sister were sleeping on high thread count Egyptian cotton in a mansion my father built. I checked my bank app. The balance remained a pathetic double-digit number, a constant reminder of the day my inheritance was vaporized by a single cold-blooded signature. My mind drifted back to that rainy afternoon 3 months ago, just hours after we laid my father to rest. I was still wearing my black veil when Bianca Vance marched into the study with a stack of documents that smelled of fresh ink and betrayal. Beside her stood our mother, Martha Vance, staring out the window at the gray Atlantic as if I didn't exist. Bianca didn't offer a hug or a word of comfort. She simply slid a termination agreement and a voluntary waiver of rights across the oak desk. "Sign it, Sierra." Bianca commanded, her voice as sharp as a razor. "You've always been the dreamer, the one playing with data while Dad and I built an empire. You don't have the stomach for what comes next." I looked at Martha Vance, pleading for a shred of maternal protection, but she didn't even turn around. Her reflection in the glass was a mask of calculated indifference. "Your sister is right," Martha said, her tone devoid of any warmth. "Bianca is stronger than you, Sierra. She is the one meant to carry the Vance name forward. You'll be taken care of with a small monthly allowance provided you stay out of the company's way." When I refused to sign away my birthright, the allowance vanished, and the locks on the Newport estate were changed by sunset. They didn't just kick me out. They attempted to erase me. Martha watched from the balcony as the movers threw my belongings into the mud, never uttering a single word of protest. She chose the winner of a war she helped ignite. Now sitting on the cold floor of Unit 402, I pulled a weathered black hard drive from my jacket pocket, the one my father had pressed into my hand during his final frantic moments in the hospital. Bianca thought she had won because she held the keys to the office, but she forgot that an empire isn't built on bricks. It's built on information. And in this forgotten cage of steel and paper, I was the only one who knew where the skeletons were buried. The hum of the legacy server was the only thing keeping the crushing silence of the storage facility at bay as I stared at the prompt, flickering on my screen. I had spent hours trying to bypass the 256-bit encryption on my father's hard drive, but the system remained a digital fortress mocking my every attempt with a cold red access denied. Just as frustration began to boil over into despair, the heavy metal door of Unit 402 creaked open. I froze, my heart hammering against my ribs, thinking Bianca had finally sent her goons to finish the job. But instead of a threat, a tall, familiar figure stepped into the pale light of my lantern. "You always did have your father's stubbornness?" "Sierra." A calm, gravelly voice echoed through the narrow space. It was Reed Sterling. He stood there in a rain-slicked trench coat, looking older than I remembered, his face etched with the exhaustion of someone who had been looking for a ghost. Reed wasn't just a family friend. He was the former chief technology officer of Vance Group and the only man my father, Garrett Vance, truly trusted with the company's digital backbone. The day after Dad's funeral, Bianca Vance had fired him without a second thought, escorting him out of the building like a common criminal because he refused to grant her administrative access to Dad's private encrypted vault. "Reed, how did you even find me?" I whispered, my voice trembling as I lowered the heavy flashlight I had been holding like a weapon. "I've spent 20 years securing the Vance assets, kid. A missing girl in a high-security storage unit isn't that hard to track if you know which digital breadcrumbs to follow," he said, stepping further into the room and glancing at my makeshift living arrangements with a pained expression. He didn't offer pity, which I appreciated. He offered a heavy, industrial-grade briefcase instead. Reed sat on an old crate of tax files and opened the case, revealing a specialized hardware module I had only seen in tech journals. "Your father knew Bianca would try to rewrite history the moment his heart stopped. He knew she would see your empathy as a weakness to be exploited. That's why he didn't leave the most important part of his legacy in the hands of the family lawyers or on a piece of paper that could be burned." I watched in silence as Reed connected the module to my laptop. The interface changed instantly, turning a deep obsidian black with a single biometric prompt. "Garrett left me with a specific task." Reed Sterling continued, his eyes meeting mine with a fierce intensity. "He gave me the decryption key, but it's useless without the master trigger. He programmed it so that the final layer of security could only be peeled back by a direct biological match. Bianca can forge signatures and she can manipulate our mother, but she can't forge your DNA, Sierra." He gestured toward the glowing sensor on the module. "This is the failsafe. He knew you'd eventually end up in the dark, and he wanted to make sure you had the light to fight back. He didn't just leave you a drive, he left you a trap for the sister who thought she could erase you." The weight of the moment pressed down on me. My father hadn't left me defenseless. He had anticipated the betrayal and turned my very existence into the key to the truth. I reached out, my finger hovering over the sensor. This wasn't just about opening a file anymore. It was about reclaiming the voice of a man who was silenced too soon and exposing the woman who thought she was untouchable. The blue light from the rugged laptop screen cut through the suffocating darkness of the storage unit, illuminating a directory of files that Bianca Vance had tried so desperately to scrub from existence. As my fingertip pressed against the biometric scanner, the final encryption layer dissolved, revealing a folder titled Project Integrity. Inside lay the ghost of my father's true intentions, preserved in high-definition clarity. My breath hitched as a video file dated just 1 week before his passing flickered to life. "I am Garrett Vance, and this is my final notarized video testament." My father's voice echoed steady and resolute, filling the small iron room. In the video, he sat in his Newport study holding a signed and sealed document before a licensed public notary. He spoke directly into the camera, stating that I was to inherit the controlling 60% share of the Vance Group and the family estate. He explained that while he loved Bianca, her aggressive risk-taking and lack of empathy made her unfit to hold the ultimate power of the legacy. Sierra has the vision to lead with a conscience. He said, his eyes filled with a pride I hadn't felt in months. Beside me, Reed Sterling pointed to a series of archived emails nested within a subfolder. They were sent from Bianca's private server to our family's longtime attorney, Mr. Harrison. The messages were chilling. They contained direct threats to expose the attorney's past gambling debts unless he lost the original digital copies of the video and helped her present a forged paper-only version to the board of directors. It was a cold, calculated coup. Bianca hadn't just stolen my money. She had systematically blackmailed anyone who stood in her way, effectively burying my father's voice under a mountain of coerced silence. It gets worse. Sierra. Reed whispered, his fingers flying across the keys to open a ledger of offshore transactions. The data revealed a staggering betrayal of the company itself. Over the last 6 months, Bianca Vance had authorized the withdrawal of $20 million from the corporate investment fund. The money hadn't gone toward expansion or innovation. It had been funneled through shell companies in the Cayman Islands to pay off her own massive personal debts incurred from a series of failed luxury real estate gambles in Dubai. This wasn't just a family dispute anymore. It was a flagrant violation of the Securities and Exchange Act. Bianca had treated the Vance Group treasury like her personal ATM, committing major securities fraud that could bring the entire empire crashing down if the SEC caught wind of it. She didn't just kick you out because she hated you, Reed said, staring at the flow of illicit funds. She kicked you out because you're a systems analyst. She knew that if you stayed in the office for even 1 week after your father died, you would find these discrepancies. You were the only person capable of seeing the holes in her math. I stared at the screen, my eyes burning from the glare and the sheer weight of the betrayal. The woman who had just called me a homeless failure in front of the Newport elite was in reality a common thief hiding behind a designer dress and a stolen title. Every dollar she spent on those champagne towers and gala invitations was stolen from the employees, the shareholders, and the legacy our father had bled for. Reed turned to me, the glow of the screen reflecting in his glasses. We have enough to put her away for a long time, Sierra, but we have to move fast. Once she officially signs the CEO permanent contract at the gala tomorrow night, she'll have the power to liquidate these accounts and disappear the evidence for good. I closed the laptop, the darkness of Unit 402 returning, but I was no longer afraid of the shadows. I had the truth notarized and undeniable, and for the first time since my father's heart stopped, I felt the cold, sharp edge of a plan taking shape. Bianca wanted a show. I was going to give her a finale she would never forget. Victory wasn't going to be achieved through a dramatic shouting match or a desperate late-night break-in. It required the cold, clinical precision of the American federal justice system. While Bianca Vance was busy rehearsing her coronation speech, Reed Sterling and I spent the dawn hours finalizing a digital courier package that would serve as her downfall. We weren't just whistleblowers. We were architects of a multi-front ambush that Bianca would never see coming until the handcuffs clicked shut. I contacted Arthur Montgomery, a high-stakes corporate litigator who had been a rival of my father's attorney and had no loyalty to the current Vance administration. Mr. Montgomery met us at a secure location in downtown Providence, his eyes widening as he scrolled through the evidence of securities fraud and the notarized video testament. This isn't just a family feud anymore, Sierra. Arthur Montgomery noted, his voice carrying the professional weight of 30 years in the courtroom. This is a violation of federal law. If we file this correctly, the Securities and Exchange Commission will have no choice but to freeze every corporate asset associated with your sister's name. Following Arthur Montgomery's strategic counsel, we officially submitted the encrypted files to the SEC's whistleblower portal and hand-delivered physical copies to the lead independent directors of the Vance Group's board. We didn't ask for a meeting, we simply gave them the truth and let the panic of personal liability do the rest of the work. By mid-afternoon, the trap was set, but the final piece of the puzzle required my physical presence. Bianca had sent a final mocking text message. "Show up at the gala tonight, Sierra. Get on that stage. Apologize for your mental instability after Dad's death, and I might just let you keep that rusty storage unit as a souvenir. Don't be late. The press loves a good redemption story." "You're actually going?" Reed asked, his concern etched deep in the lines of his face as I adjusted the collar of the silk dress I had kept protected in a garment bag. "I'm going because Bianca needs an audience for her triumph." I replied, my voice devoid of the fear that had haunted me for months. "She wants me to play the part of the broken, repentant sister so she can look merciful to the shareholders. If I don't show up, she might get suspicious and move the offshore funds before the SEC can flag the accounts. I have to be her perfect submissive puppet until the very second the curtain falls." I knew exactly what she wanted, a public humiliation to cement her power. She expected me to walk onto that stage at the Newport estate, bowed and defeated, begging for a scrap of her stolen fortune. She thought she was privileging me to my own funeral, but in reality, I was attending her professional execution. As I looked at my reflection, the pale, determined face of a woman who had survived the shadows of Unit 402, I realized that the Sierra Vance who feared her sister had died the night I was kicked out. The woman taking her place tonight was a ghost with a subpoena. The drive back to Newport was silent. The mansions along the coast looked like gilded cages shimmering under the evening sun. I wasn't going back to reclaim a house. I was going back to reclaim a name that had been dragged through the mud of greed. Bianca wanted a show, and I was prepared to give her the most expensive finale in the history of the Vance bloodline. The crystal chandeliers of the Newport estate flickered with a cold, predatory brilliance as the elite of Rhode Island's business world gathered for the official coronation of the new CEO. Bianca Vance stood at the mahogany podium, her white silk gown shimmering like armor, exuding an air of untouchable triumph. She looked out over the sea of investors and board members, her gaze finally landing on me, standing near the back of the room. With a thin, venomous smile, she adjusted the microphone, ready to deliver the speech that would cement her power and finalize my exile. "Before we toast to the future of the Vance Group," Bianca's voice projected through the hall, dripping with feigned sympathy, "I'd like to invite my sister Sierra to the stage. She has struggled with the weight of our father's passing, but tonight, she is here to publicly acknowledge the new leadership and find her place within our family, once again." A heavy silence fell over the room as I began to walk down the center aisle. Every eye was on me, some filled with pity, others with the cold indifference of the wealthy. But just as my foot hit the first step of the stage, the massive oak doors at the rear of the ballroom swung open with a thunderous bang. The rhythmic click of polished shoes on marble cut through the whispers. Arthur Montgomery led the procession, flanked by 4 stern-faced men in dark suits carrying federal credentials. "This assembly is now under the jurisdiction of the Securities and Exchange Commission," one of the officials announced, his voice booming with authority. "All corporate activities are hereby suspended, pending an investigation into systemic securities fraud and embezzlement." Bianca's face drained of color, her hand gripping the podium so hard her knuckles turned white. "This is a private event. Get these people out of here!" She shrieked, her composure fracturing. But Arthur Montgomery didn't flinch. He handed a thick stack of legal documents to the chairman of the board. Under Delaware corporate law specifically, the statutes regarding fiduciary breach, and the validity of notarized digital testaments, Bianca Vance's appointment is null and void, he stated firmly. We have submitted evidence of a $20 million misappropriation of funds and the suppression of the true last will and testament of Garrett Vance. Suddenly, the massive presentation screens behind Bianca flickered to life, overriding her sleek corporate slides. The hall was filled with the resonant, unmistakable voice of our father. The video we had recovered in the darkness of Unit 402 played in high definition, his face appearing 10 feet tall behind his trembling daughter. I, Garrett Vance, hereby declare Sierra Vance as the majority shareholder and rightful successor. My father's image declared, his eyes seeming to pierce through the room. Any attempt to bypass this digital directive constitutes a criminal act against my estate. The ballroom erupted into chaos. Shareholders who had been smiling at Bianca moments ago now recoiled in disgust. I watched as the board members huddled in a frantic circle, realizing that their personal liability was at stake. The evidence of Bianca's offshore gambling debts and the threats she made to our family attorney scrolled across the screens like a digital confession. Bianca began to scream a raw, desperate sound as she lunged toward the laptop controlling the feed, but she was intercepted by 2 federal agents. Bianca Vance, you are being detained for questioning regarding grand larceny, forgery, and violations of the Securities and Exchange Act. An officer stated, his voice cold and indifferent to her status. As the guards escorted her toward the side exit, she caught my eye. The predatory arrogance was gone, replaced by a frantic, jagged fear. I didn't say a word. I simply stood my ground as the rightful owner of the house she had tried to steal. Martha Vance sat in the front row, her face buried in her hands, finally realizing that she had bet everything on a daughter who was now leaving in handcuffs. The empire hadn't fallen. It had simply returned to the hands of the one who knew how to protect it. The silence in my father's mahogany-paneled office was heavy, a stark contrast to the chaotic sirens that had faded into the Newport night. I stood by the floor-to-ceiling window watching the Atlantic waves crash against the cliffs, realizing that the view looked different when you actually own the ground beneath your feet. The transition of power had been swift. With the SEC's freeze on Bianca's accounts and the board's emergency vote, I was no longer a squatter in a storage unit. I was the steward of the Vance legacy. A soft, hesitant knock at the door broke my focus. I didn't need to turn around to know who it was. The scent of expensive Chanel perfume and the sound of trembling footsteps were enough. Martha Vance stood in the doorway, her eyes red-rimmed, looking smaller and more fragile than I had ever seen her. The cold, indifferent woman who had watched me get kicked into the mud 3 months ago was gone, replaced by a mother terrified of her own shadow. Sierra, I didn't know the extent of what Bianca was doing. She began, her voice cracking as she clutched a silk handkerchief. I mean, I knew about the will. I knew she had changed some things, but I was scared. She told me that if I didn't support her, she would put me in a state facility and sell the house. I thought I was protecting our lifestyle. I turned to face her, but I didn't feel the surge of anger I expected. I only felt a profound, hollow pity. You weren't protecting our lifestyle, Martha. You were protecting your comfort at the expense of your soul. You watched your youngest daughter survive in a metal box for 90 days because you were afraid of losing a view of the ocean. I'm so sorry, Sierra. Please, let's just put this behind us. We can be a family again. She pleaded, reaching out a hand that I didn't take. We were never a family. We were a corporation. I replied calmly. Bianca is facing 10 to 15 years for grand larceny and forgery. I've arranged for a comfortable 2-bedroom apartment for you in downtown Providence. It's paid for and you'll have a modest monthly stipend, enough for a dignified life, but not enough for the vanity you're used to. You chose Bianca because you thought she was the winner. Now you'll have to learn to live with the consequences of that choice. I am no longer the child who needs your validation to feel whole. As Martha left the office, her head bowed in a mixture of shame and defeat, I sat in my father's chair. I realized then that Garrett Vance hadn't just left me a company. He had left me a final, brutal education in human nature. The first lesson was about sustainable success. Bianca tried to build a throne out of lies, theft, and intimidation, but an empire built on sand will always succumb to the tide of the law. You cannot cheat your way to a lasting legacy. True power requires the integrity to stand under the light of scrutiny. The second was the value of preparation. My father hadn't abandoned me to the wolves. By leaving the digital keys with Reed and utilizing biometric encryption, he taught me that in a world of betrayal, the only person who can truly save you is yourself, provided you have the tools and the foresight to fight back, using the system, not just your emotions. Finally, I learned the importance of family boundaries. Blood might make you related, but loyalty and respect make you family. Sometimes the most courageous thing you can do is cut the ties that bind you to toxic people, even if they share your last name. To find my true value, I had to lose everything and realize that I was enough, even when I had nothing but a lantern and a hard drive in a cold storage unit. I looked at the black Patek Philippe watch sitting on the desk, the real one recovered from my father's private safe. I strapped it onto my wrist. It was time to build something new, something honest. I was a Vance, but for the first time in my life, I was finally free.